Heather Roy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak to the second reading of the Holidays Amendment Bill on behalf of the ACT Party. The ACT Party doesn't sit on the Transport and Industrial Relations Committee, so we didn't sit through the submissions, Mr Speaker, but I have to say that we're absolutely delighted with the outcome of this bill and we'll be supporting it wholeheartedly. This bill, Mr Speaker, at a very high level is about choice. It's about reaching decisions by agreement, something that seems to have been completely lost on the other side of the House, and it's about providing flexibility in the workforce, all of things that will help with productivity and stimulate economic growth, Mr Speaker, something this government takes very seriously. So it's been a great day in this House. Firstly, we had the 90-day trial bill, which has passed, and we're absolutely delighted that that will now be extended to all workplaces, and again will provide choice and flexibility in the workforce. And already, as predicted, Mr Speaker, we have the trade unionists from the other side of the House being wound up, and they'll get more and more vocal as the speech goes on, I'm sure. Before we start looking at just what exactly the Labour Party dislikes about this bill, I think we should look, Mr Speaker, just at what the bill does allow. Firstly, there are three main areas that we will see change. The first is that by agreement, that's a very important part of this clause, by agreement, 1 week of an employee's minimum entitlement to annual holidays will be allowed to be traded for a cash payment to the employee. The second thing, we'll see employers and employees allowed to agree to the transfer of the observance of a public holiday to another working day. And the third thing is the provision for employers to request proof of sickness or injury within the first 3 consecutive calendar days of an employee taking sick leave without first having reasonable grounds to suspect that the sick leave is not genuine. And I'll come in a moment, Mr Speaker, as to why that is important. But these three provisions, along with the others in the bill that I haven't mentioned but were well outlined by the Minister, will provide choice, will provide flexibility in the workplace, and I reiterate, Mr Speaker, that these decisions will be reached by agreement between employee and employer. One of the reasons that I think that the opposite side of the House objects so violently, not just to the 90-day trial bill, but also to the provisions in this particular bill, is that they don't have any trust. They don't think that things can happen without outside interference. They don't believe that an employee and an employer can sit down together and work out the provisions that are best for them, best for each individual, and for mutual benefit. Because the Labour Party thinks that there are no good employers. They don't trust a single employer in this country. They also think, Mr Speaker, here they go, they're getting wound up, they don't think that there are any employees who don't act and behave in an exemplary manner. They don't think that there's ever been an employee, Mr Speaker, who might swing the lead when it comes to sickness. They don't believe there's an employee who might think that they feel like a day off, so they take a mental health day when in fact there's nothing wrong with them.
They know what that's like, yeah.
That's right. How often does that happen? Every single one of us in this House know that these things happen, and for too long, Mr Speaker, the balance has not been right between the rights of the employee and the rights of the employer. And fairness is actually, as Mr Bridges has just said, is actually a very important thing in the fair place. We hear about fairness on behalf of the employees, but we hear nothing from the other side of the House about fairness when it comes to employers. And if we're going to have a settled workplace, we need to have choice, we need to have fairness, and we need to have flexibility. Mr Speaker, the Green Speaker before me talked about quality of life. And he talked about quality of life as if only the 122 parliamentarians in this House can be the people who determine what that quality of life should be. I'm not sure that for a moment he thought that my quality of life, or what I consider to be quality of life, might not be the same as what he determines quality of life to be. Actually, it's individuals, Mr Speaker, who determine what quality of life is for them, for their family, and for their particular situation. And it's they who should be able to decide whether or not they want to take 3 weeks of annual leave and have 1 week cashed in, because they might need some extra cash, they might have something that they want to buy, or whether they take the 4 full weeks. But, Mr Speaker, it is done by agreement, and that's the important thing, by agreement between employee and employer, because that now, Mr Speaker, is going to be what is in the law. And it's not for parliamentarians to tell people what will give them quality of life. That's for people to determine for themselves. And some of the accusations that came from the other side of the House when we talked about cashing in that extra week of annual leave were just absolutely ridiculous. What about this situation? Let one of them stand up and answer this question for me. What about those people who don't take all of their annual leave, but when they leave a job, they have a huge amount of annual leave accumulated and they're paid off? Is that also selling out? Should those people, if you take their argument to an extreme, you would say, well, actually nobody can leave work, they can leave a job ever until all of their annual leave is worked out. What is the difference between cashing up 1 week's annual leave every year from accumulating annual leave, as some people do deliberately, that's a choice on their behalf, and having a large payout when they leave a job? Answer me that question. Did you notice that there's suddenly silence across the other side? They can't answer the question. They cannot answer the question. The employer has to pay that money out, and they quite rightly should be able to do so. And so we hear, Mr Speaker, all this talk of quality of life, which apparently we're much better at determining for the individual than they are themselves. We hear about the attacking of workers' rights, but never about the attacking of employers' work.
They hate business.
What this bill is about, Mr Speaker, and what the 90-day trial bill before it was about making choices possible. Making choices possible for employees and for employers, about sitting down and working out in a workplace what is best for both parties and getting a win-win situation. But the opposition, Mr Speaker, don't believe that that is possible. And the difference between this side of the House and that side of the House is that we trust people to be able to make rational decisions, get together and do those, and this side of the House doesn't. And it was very evident when they were in government, when the Labour Party led the government, Mr Speaker, when we had employment bills before the House, like this one, we would see the union officials wandering around in the lobby. So it was very clear. It was very clear then where the emphasis was coming from. It was very clear where the Labour Party funding was probably coming from. It was very clear that they were pulling the strings, that the unions were leading the charge. But this side of the House is actually able to make reasoned decisions that will provide choice for people, that will provide flexibility in the workforce, that will allow fairness for both sides, for employees and employers. And most importantly, it allows all parties in the workplace to reach decisions by agreement. That's the way life works outside the workplace, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work inside the workplace too. And the ACT Party, Mr Speaker, very proudly not only supported the 90-day trial bill before this one, but this Holidays Amendment Bill, because it will make life better, choices better for workers and for employers.
Great.